Hello everyone, thank you for coming and checking out my 2000 Mazda Miata. This is an NB1 Evolution Orange, one of about 600 something made that year. This has been a little project of mine that I've had. I've actually had quite some fun doing some different things to it and making it different. Today I'm going to run through and kind of give you a rundown on what all I've done to it and my aspirations and plans and ideas of things I plan on doing to it. So stick around. We've got the boost gauge from Stack, high quality, and we've also got the Spartan 14.7. It's for the wideband. I originally had an AEM, and I also had I think it was Glow Shift from eBay, but both of those guys, they weren't the best in quality. The Glow Shift, it seemed like the 0 gauge area, I was really finicky about it. It was just something I didn't quite like as much. It didn't seem as accurate as what my data logger was seeing. But I also went with the replace the AEM for the Stack, or the 14.7, because of the fact that I liked a better quality setup. It also came with its own controller as well as that. I've got a Megasquirt ECM. It's a plug and play too. It's one of the older versions. So we'll squeeze down in here. But this guy is already set up and wired up with options. And I'll go ahead and show you that right there right quick. Get to that here in a little bit. But so basically, I didn't want to go too crazy. I had the option to go with the Megasquirt 3. But at the time, I figured the options and stuff that I was running, it being more of an analog setup, that I didn't absolutely necessarily need the options for it, so I opted out of it. There's some probably things that I would appreciate about the Megasquirt 3 now that the Megasquirt 2 isn't quite as capable of. But this was one thing that I actually put a decal on here, a little logo, and I recently took it off, and from the sun fade sitting out in the Georgia heat, somehow it managed to leave a pretty sweet little logo. I thought that was pretty cool, so I don't plan on buffing it out or anything like that. I actually plan on cutting out vents in the hood later on down the road. But I've recently upgraded the brakes. These are the sport brakes from Mazda, but I went with slotted rotors, and I've also got them powder coated, or not powder, yeah, zinc coated black. So that way they don't stick to the hub over time. I hate that. So I've also got the powder coated red calipers. There is clearance. You just have to be aware of where you place your wheel weights. Koenig wheels, and these are 15s, so they do clear. It's quite tight, but they clear. So moving on to the engine bay, which is probably the best part of the whole thing right now. So it's a Jackson Racing M45 Supercharger. It's the baby, but it's not bad for what it does. It was recently rebuilt. I haven't had it running since the rebuild, or not long enough to really enjoy it, I should say. But it's got upgraded higher speed bearings for the rotors. It's got the coated internals were coated, and the rotors were thermal coated as well, just to prevent the air gap from being excessive, which was nice. I swapped out the pulley to a 62.5 instead of 65. QMax coolant reroute kit. JDM Sport intercooler plumbing. This intercooler plumbing actually wasn't half bad. I think I paid like $200 on eBay for it. I came up with the routing myself with the idea of keeping my radiator serviceable, which I've got sitting over there, the replacement. When that one decides to grenade, too lazy to replace it. But I've got a Mishimoto Z-Line front mount intercooler. It's actually probably overkill for this application, being a little too excessive, but I really don't mind it. It seems to perform still quite decently. It's pretty sturdy mounted. I put brackets top and bottom, 3 bolts, so it's pretty sturdy mounted. The intake side of things, still running the Jackson Racing air filter, oiled, so don't worry about that too much. But it comes on back. I retained the sensor back here and the U-bends on around. Eventually I want to come up with a better design where that's away from things and maybe a heat shield or something like that, but we'll see. So U-bend tucks in nicely. I did have to cut out away a little bit of metal, nothing too crazy though, on both sides to get this to work. But the accessibility of the radiator is actually a lot easier, and for $200 for the plumbing, and I think it was maybe $200 for the intercooler versus $800 for Track Dog Racing, you know, the trade-off wasn't bad. Performance wise, I'll talk about that right quick. I will say that with the Track Dog Racing, you'd expect to see on this setup maybe around 7-8 psi at top, like nothing too crazy. I'm right now seeing 5 psi, so I would expect what, like 4 psi pressure drop across this setup in their optimized version. So they spent $400 more or so to get that kind of gain. So, you know, it kind of is worth it if you want to go that route, but budget friendly, this again, it worked for me. The plumbing is silicone. I actually had these guys collapsing when I first ran this setup. This side was really bad about it, and I noticed it. So I took some of this leftover plumbing and I actually cut it up and stuffed it down in these to prevent the collapsing. So it's actually worked quite well. So it's a lot more rigid and it allows the air to bypass the way that it should. As new 550cc fuel injectors, Toyota Cop setup from the Celica GTS, Mamone brackets, and the wiring harness for it all. It's a plug and play setup, so I can remove that and go back to factory if I ever desired to. I don't know why though. QMax coolant reroute setup, so that goes underneath here, snakes on across and on back. I like the fact that it kind of matches my paint, which is pretty cool. It's a really nice setup. It was easy to install, all things considered, in vehicle. I don't like the fact that the thermostat sizes are different, if I recall correctly, but it's not like anything that's going to be a deal breaker. The thermostat's, as long as it's set properly, it'll still work properly. So the throttle body setup, I've got a dual throttle body setup on here. So if you notice, I removed a spring off one side, and then I did over here as well. So the idea of what behind this was, they came with 2 springs, 1 or 2 springs on each throttle body. By removing 1 spring each, you have 2 springs on both throttle bodies. The OEM Jackson Racing, your throttle body was moved here. There's a dummy throttle body over there. Because that dummy throttle body was over there, and I replaced that with the actual throttle body, I had to come up with the idea to retain that OEM pedal feel. So to talk about that setup right quick, with the cables, I ended up deleting my cruise control, which was here. I didn't really use it, and I don't really drive this thing long cruises or anything like that. I've got other vehicles for that, and when I do, I don't mind it. But so I bought another Mazda throttle cable, and back to that pedal assembly setup, I took all that apart and I was able to weld up another fork onto there. That was probably the hardest part of this assembly, was the accelerator pedal setup. And it's because they're 2 different sizes. The holes in the firewall are the same size, but everything else is different. So the cable runs through, and this is how Jackson Racing wanted it done. And it U-bends, and it comes right back under here. Okay. So, and they are synced. And so that's Jackson Racing's style, and that's how they wanted it set up with factory. And I said, okay, well, Mazda has their way of having it done because Mazda made this. So the right side, left in this view, but the right side comes across the firewall and it runs the OEM Mazda factory routing. I figured, you know, I could go bigger throttle bodies, I could chase all that and everything, but honestly the OEM ones work just fine, and cost wise it was really efficient. I think I spent more money on doing the maintenance and the paint and the sandpaper and all that stuff to prep all of it and get it looking good than I did anything else. But moving on, the Spec D headlights, those guys were made for NB2, and this is obviously NB1. So bumper fitment isn't the best in the world for alignment. As you can see, like the quarter right here is kind of janky, and the front lip is kind of janky. I did take a heat gun to it to try and help it out. It's not like 100%, but like I said, I plan on replacing this front bumper. It wasn't the best in the world. From like 10 feet away though, you can't even really notice it. I mean, the headlights aren't that bad. The Spec D, the clear coat's already worn off after what, maybe 2 years. So it's kind of a little lower quality. They don't throw like the greatest, but they look cool. One thing I want to mention about this setup is that this fan, because it's an AC kick-on fan, or set up basically to work anything harder as an additional accessory. So what I ended up doing was repurposing that fan, so it's not just a dead wasted space. Because I actually ended up repurposing into the options of the Mega Squirt. Set the hysteresis a little offset. I think it's like 10 degrees higher than what factory would be. And because I did that, is if this fan wasn't ever enough output, or if it didn't work anymore, this fan would kick on and support and do the work. So there was always one that was safeguarding the other. So that was one thing that I did that I thought was kind of clever. You know, it was an additional usable option, and it's a safeguard. It's worked quite well. Not that I could ever really tell. It runs stock temps. GM IAT sensor, that's worked quite well, and it was pretty accurate. So I have no complaints there. My real big complaints for sensors was that stupid wideband from AEM. That thing was a piece of junk. I'm not impressed. And I used to be really impressed with those guys, but I'm not anymore. I've got this digital voltmeter display. This guy is going to be for the battery, so I've got to wire that bad boy in. I'm actually planning on putting that here in the center console ashtray area. Maybe do a 3D print setup. We'll see what I can come up with. But so that cable's for my data logging and tuning. I wanted to show you up under here so I can get some light in there without blinding everybody. Right there, my accessory fuse panel. The accessory fuse panel is for additional add-ons and stuff like that. I went through the great effort to install this. This was probably one of the best locations that I could find that didn't interfere with much of anything. The factory airbags are still in place, which is nice. It's relatively accessible. I mean, it takes a little bit of effort, but let's see. So I've got them labeled and everything like that. 3D printed pieces, inducting to replace what I had to remove for the AC related stuff. Moving on to the trunk. This guy, before I catch any hell about it, I plan on replacing that. I either plan on buying one or building one. We have the capability. We have the tooling. Timing is probably the biggest issue and desire to learn. But next bit was sound deadener. I actually went overkill with this, and I know a lot of people probably freak out about it, but you know, it's actually not half bad. I did the same thing on the interior all the way throughout the deck lid area, as well as back through here. So I plan on putting matting and stuff like that. It's not just going to be like this where it's bare. But I'm going to upgrade the battery setup. This is my continuous state solenoid in place, and that's for the accessory fuse panel that's up front that we were just talking about. Wire ferrules, the battery terminal setup with wire ferrules. I really do like these wire ferrules. They do make things clean instead of having a bunch of ring eyelets and stuff like that stacked on each other. This looks like it'll eliminate quite a bit and clean it up. So, but eventually I want to do like a sound system in here. Nothing too crazy, but just something. And then I've got this taped up and stuff because I'm putting a 3-piece monster ducktail spoiler across there. But fitment has been poor, so I'm learning my hand at bodywork, which has been a really progressive thing in itself. I've got an ISR Racing mid-pipe and exhaust back. It actually does sound quite well, if I do say so myself. No bumper cut yet. I think I might want to do like a valence or something like that, if anything. Air down, whatever you want to call it. But it's not really raspy. It does sound good. I didn't spend a lot of money for it either. But if you want to know anything else, just shoot a question in the comments. I'd love to hear what you got to say. I'd be more than welcome to answer any of your questions. Also, real quick before I forget, it dynoed up at Colorado. Boost Creek was the place that did it, and the day it made on dyno, it was 161 wheel horsepower and 145 foot-pounds of torque on 91 pump gas. So nothing too crazy, but it obviously wasn't bad. I do have pictures on my Instagram account, SC_Miata, of that dyno graph and what it looks like. Like I said, it's a really responsive little setup. It's nothing crazy, but it's definitely worthwhile. The last thing I wanted to mention was that I am seeing a lot less boost into the engine than what I would with a track dog. So it is kind of a win there, but I'm also seeing a lot cooler temps going into the engine bay versus a lot hotter temps. So it is effectively getting cooled off and still seeing boosted air temps into the engine bay. So I think that's a pretty nice little trade-off. Less boost temps that's seen to the engine is less work that's being done. So I think that's a pretty fair trade-off in my opinion. Once again, thanks for checking it out. Have a good one.